Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is both startling and, honestly, absolutely fascinating. We're looking at the psychological reality of why being super smart often acts more like a trap than a launchpad. If you've ever found yourself wondering why sheer brain power doesn't automatically equal success, well, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this one.
So let's kick things off with a pretty uncomfortable question about potential versus reality. Think about it for a second. Why do the absolute smartest people you know so often have the most stagnant lives? It's totally wild, right? It's a paradox that completely flies in the face of literally everything we're taught in school about intelligence and success.
To figure this out, we've got to take a quick trip back in time to 1921. Check out this number, 1,521. A Stanford psychologist named Lewis Terman handpicked exactly 1,521 California school kids who scored over 140 on an IQ test. He called these brilliant kids his termites, and he was absolutely convinced that they were going to be the ones to shape the entire 20th century.
But here is where it gets crazy. The gifted termites, they grew up to be mostly dentists, accountants, and mid-level managers. Solid jobs, sure, but they won exactly 0 Nobel Prizes. Now get this. The kids who missed the IQ cutoff, the ones excluded from the study, 2 of those rejects, boys named William Shockley and Luis Alvarez, actually went on to win Nobel Prizes in physics. So the certified geniuses didn't shape the century, but the kids who weren't deemed smart enough actually did.
This completely shatters that comforting little lie we tell ourselves, doesn't it? The one that says smart people just naturally win at life. Instead, it reveals a much harsher truth. Cognitive psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman really hit the nail on the head here. He says, cognition without execution is a prison built from your own ceiling. Think about that. Intelligence can actually become a sedative. It does the heavy lifting up in your head so you never actually get your hands dirty in the real world. Which brings us right to our very first invisible snare. Trap 1, the recognition sedative. This is basically a neurological magic trick that captures gifted minds super early on, usually way before they can even vote.
To see how this trap actually springs shut, we need to look at brain chemistry. Neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz discovered something incredible about dopamine, our brain's reward chemical. It turns out dopamine doesn't actually reward you for getting what you want. It rewards you the exact second your brain predicts you're going to get a reward. You see the solution, your dopamine spikes on the prediction, and you do absolutely nothing. The incredibly fast engine of a smart brain gets the chemical high of finishing the race before a single muscle even moves.
What happens next is what we call the counterfeit currency of feeling smart. Picture a bookshelf stuffed with half-read self-help or productivity books. Every single one of those books is a closed dopamine economy. You read about an elegant system, you feel super equipped, and your brain pays you in counterfeit progress. The whole transaction happens in your head, and the application phase, it never even starts. Fast forward 3 months, and literally nothing in your actual life has changed.
But there's a catch. This sedative only works if you already believe you're inherently special, which is a belief most gifted kids develop really early on. And that leads us straight into Trap 2, the praise paradox. Look at Carol Dweck's famous 1998 Columbia study. The data here is mind-blowing. When kids were praised purely for being smart, they overwhelmingly chose the easiest puzzle they could find next. But the kids who were praised for their effort, they jumped right at the harder puzzles. Praising kids for their intelligence completely calcifies their identity. Being smart becomes this fragile little trophy they have to protect at all costs, meaning every difficult problem isn't a fun challenge anymore. It's a direct threat to who they are.
And you better believe that childhood conditioning follows them right into adulthood. Mathematician Paul Halmo summed it up beautifully. He said, "The difference between a great mathematician and a competent one is the willingness to look stupid for hours at a time." The problem is, the gifted adult often spends their whole life hiding from anything where intelligence isn't the absolute deciding factor. They just can't stomach the feeling of not knowing. Looking stupid threatens the entire foundation of their identity.
So because they absolutely refuse to look foolish, gifted underachievers fall into this brutal double trap, avoiding the middle and the contempt reflex. Let's unpack how these two things team up to totally paralyze a person's potential.
First off, they split their life into 2 extremes. On one side, you've got guaranteed wins. These are things they've already mastered, way beneath their actual capabilities. On the other side, unfalsifiable fantasies. Like writing a massive novel that's going to change the world. And since they never actually sit down to write it, they never have to explain why it failed. What they are actively terrified of is the middle ground, that boring, mortal, messy space where you actually have to be a visible beginner. To protect the giant gap between those guaranteed wins and their grand fantasies, they pull out the contempt reflex. They look at all the unglamorous stuff, networking, marketing, the slow grind of getting better, and they dismiss it. They absolutely refuse to be a beginner in public. And the trickiest part? They disguise this deep fear of failure as just having high standards or refined taste. They write off normal hard work because admitting it matters means admitting their intelligence isn't a magic wand, and they actually have to do the boring refs just like everybody else.
Organizational psychologist Adam Grant makes a brilliant point about this. He says the highest performers in literally any field are rarely the most naturally talented. They're just the ones most willing to do unglamorous work for really, really unglamorous lengths of time. If you have talent but you aren't willing to be mediocre in public while you learn, your talent is, quite frankly, just unspent currency.
Okay, let's pull back the curtain on the actual biology behind all this. This is Trap 4. The broken executive engine. The neurological reason behind this total failure to execute is something almost zero self-help books will ever tell you, mostly because it has absolutely nothing to do with just trying harder.
It comes down to a measurable concept that clinical psychologist Peg Dawson calls asynchronous development. This is when someone's analytical brain hits adult sophistication way ahead of schedule, but their ability to organize, execute, and actually follow through is severely delayed. It's like putting a massive high-horsepower engine in a car, but the driver shows up years late, or sometimes just never shows up at all.
When you look at cognition versus execution, high-end pattern recognition and verbal skills are fantastic, but it's your prefrontal cortex that physically turns a thought into motion. Brain scans from the last decade actually show delayed maturation in those exact prefrontal regions for a lot of highly gifted kids. That is exactly why a brilliant adult can understand the deepest complexities of global finance, but completely forget to pay their own electric bill on time. And the worst part? Thinking even harder about the problem just feeds more dopamine to the thinking side, starving the executive side and making the whole imbalance so much worse.
So all these traps quietly pile up over the years, but eventually, reality always catches up. And this usually happens right around the late 30s or early 40s. Bringing them to what we call the crossroads. The gifted adult looks around and realizes that the average people they used to dismiss have built actual things, businesses, books, deep relationships, while they're just sitting there with a head full of brilliant, untested concepts and a massive list of elaborate excuses. It forces a pretty brutal choice. At this point, there are only two ways forward. Shape 1, they collapse the lie, swallow their pride, endure the absolute humiliation of being an entry-level beginner in the real world, and finally build something tangible. Or, Shape 2, they aggressively protect the lie. They grow bitter, they invent all these hyper-sophisticated theories about why the world is broken and unfair, and ultimately, they die very clever but completely unbuilt.
It is a super heavy realization, I know, and that is exactly why I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. Is the praise you receive throughout your life functioning as fuel to help you build reality? Or is it acting as a sedative, just keeping you warm and cozy inside a fantasy? Take a long, hard look at the tiny choices you're making every single day. Are you stepping out into the messy, visible arena of actually being effective? Or are you just hiding inside the comfortable, safe experience of simply being smart? Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you some powerful stuff to think about.